Looking back at my childhood experiences, trying to define the undercurrents of my family dynamics, to see what was behind the visible, and understanding my familial role as protector, I am reminded of Garp in John Irving's book, The World According to Garp. Garp was always on watch, looking out for anything that could possibly harm his family. I identify with his son, Walt, as he stood ankle-deep in the foam from the surf and peered into the waves without taking a step for the longest time. "The undertoad," Walt said. "I'm trying to see it." For me, the undertoad is the disquiet below the hysterical laughter, the dark windows of a home at dinner time, or the moment of conflict that remains unexpressed. As children, the constructs we live within are beyond our control. Gradually, I became aware of the overriding fear in my household, like the buzz of the fluorescent lights in a classroom. These things, at first are seen and heard when new to us, once immersed in our everyday lives, become transparent. My artwork, from photography to sculpture and the process by which they were created, evolved in order to release my repression. While photographing my family, I recognized traces of anxiety and fear that mirror my own experiences, as seen here in Fear 2008. Charlotte Cotton writes in Photography as Contemporary Art, "We can all find signs of the undercurrents of specific family relationships in our private photographs, an editing and sequencing of seemingly unguarded moments that reveal the origins and manifestations of the subject's emotional lives. It is this energy that escapes under the suppression and containment of keeping up appearances that engages me." While editing thousands of photographs of my everyday experiences, amongst what my family would consider the beautiful and perfect, I identified some of the poignant emotions that engulfed my childhood, traits that still characterize my family culture. What I noticed in many of the images, shown here in my photograph Isolation 2009, is that no one is looking at each other. When I showed the photographs I created to my family, what they wanted to perceive about our family life and what I saw were incompatible. As a result of my role as keeper of the facade, photographing them stifled what I needed to convey. It became necessary for me to find new materials and methods to express my childhood experiences. I realized to meet my own needs and to communicate with a broader audience, I must take my work in a different direction. How could I translate invisible behaviors and the feelings behind them? I began making marks and collecting objects to represent dysfunctional relationships. I moved from documentation to the expression of the feelings behind the interactions, to uncovering multiple meanings hidden within complex words and gestures, revealing the repressed emotions felt just below the surface. String Attached 2009 represents the nonverbal contract between members of the family that keeps everyone in their place. I began to see items that have marks of repressed energy, like pencils with teeth marks, holes erased through paper, or endless lists. I became aware that even my grandmother would make a constant tapping noise with her fingernails on the table while she talked about memories that made her uncomfortable, illustrated here in my image Tap 2009. In a paper on repression, Sigmund Freud reflects, "It is not the repression itself which produces substitutive formations and symptoms, but that these latter are indications of a return of the repressed." I began to understand the emotional energy could not be created or destroyed, but only converted into another form, like the whack-a-mole game at the state fair. In looking to capture energy manifested into physical expression, my photograph Evidence 2008 symbolizes my nephew's anxiety expressed through repetitive biting on a styrofoam cup. These marks also remind me of the holes in his shirt collars and sleeves, anxious marks left from his chewing. These behaviors end up leaving traces, turning ordinary objects into visual records, expressing the unseen. Exploring how I could manifest the feelings hidden beneath the surface, I was prompted to look deeper into the expression of dysfunction. I researched artists who dealt with troubled family relationships and observed how these relationships were reflected in their art. Tierney Guerin documents her mother's mental illness with her own children, revealing the stress within her family history in her book, Daddy, Where Are You? In this striking image, her mother sits in the grass in the shadow of a tree, looking intently into a white leather boot, while a young infant is lying on the grass, outside the shadow, in full sun. It is the inattentiveness of the mother that is so disturbing. There is no interaction, no connection, no evidence of nurturing. Missing Me, 2008, spurred my movement toward the use of three-dimensional objects by using remnants my family discarded. It began with a buckshot paper. It carries the weight, not only the actual weight of the shotgun blast pattern, but also the figurative weight of time lost with family. I began thinking more about what other three-dimensional forms I could reuse that had history, that had ties to family, and which in their simplest form would open my personal experiences to other people's interpretations. Missing Me was crucial in my development as an artist. It carried traces like the marks on the cup in evidence, but in this piece I put myself into it, asking what was missed. What did I miss? What did my sisters miss? And what did my father miss? And as to that last question, the answer was simple. He missed me. In this image, I felt my voice, which had been silent, speak. In that moment, I shifted from being the outside viewer to expressing my own experiences. In honing in on an aspect of my work to photograph, I realized for me, my photographs were not enough. More than a photo of my fork, I want the viewer to experience the actual object and create a visceral experience where my art and my audience share the same space. In Michael Fried's book, Art and Objecthood, he points out, the obvious response is to give up working on a single plane in favor of 3 dimensions. Objects take on various tactile qualities and engage the senses. In navigating a space with sculptural forms, the viewer has the opportunity to experience art in numerous ways, catalyzing a multitude of realities and an abundance of interpretations. Visiting the Lisa Setti Gallery in Scottsdale, Arizona, I was particularly drawn to Sear Bonnet 1, 2008, and Angela Ellsworth's exhibition, Underpinnings. This exhibit was pivotal in my using sculptural objects as familial symbols. As I came closer to inspect Sear Bonnet 1, I could feel the pins going into my head as I looked at it. I thought more about dimension and how the exhibit becomes a space for engagement. Michael Fried quotes Robert Morris, "The space of the room itself is a structuring factor. The total space is hopefully altered in certain desired ways by the presence of objects. The influential connection between art, audience, and environment is where my recognition of objects inhabiting a space of human interaction began." For me, creating a work of art at times starts with reading and thinking through possibilities. Other times, it begins with an object that shapes my thoughts. Browsing through Goodwill stores, stopping at garage sales, looking down alleyways and searching boxes of my own objects and discarded family possessions, all the while, I'm trying to see how the object relates to the experiences I felt as a child. Recently, in Art in America, Edward Gomez wrote, "Used objects contain historical energy. You can't always see that energy, but you can feel it." I'm trying to find where our histories intermingle. In Robert Gober's work, untitled 1997, the objects allow me to speculate about the burdens that are draining children of their ability to function. I'm interested in the placement and combination of the objects that infer possible meanings for the viewer. In this installation, the chair becomes representative of children, the tissue box of grief, and the size relationships between the objects distorted as the realities of children are skewed. Robert Gober reflects, "Most of my sculptures have been memories remade, recombined, and filtered through my current experiences. I am convinced that the most powerful art engages the viewer, that is interactive, allowing the viewer to assign personal meanings or narratives. As I see it, the questions and the mysteries embodied in the art are the most important components in captivating an audience." I became aware of the duality that occurs while creating objects that are extremely specific to me, while at the same time expressing broad fundamental concepts that open the door to vast interpretations. In the creation of Pick 2009, I used a methodical wrapping motion to simultaneously repeat how dysfunction felt to me as a child and to make it visible, to create a physical manifestation of obsessive-compulsive behaviors that characterize my family. In Pick, the pitchfork's handle was docked and the tines wrapped. As I left more of the tines exposed, it became a more overt sculpture. This piece references both the domestic and the ideal American family. I impaired functionality, yet still left the ends exposed that could cause harm, leaving a dangerous psychological edge. I was guided to Louise Bourgeois' work by fellow students and faculty and felt an immediate connection. Her work is underpinned by psychology and family relationships. She uses a wide variety of materials focusing on sculptural forms, recalling childhood memories, yet she does not create a specific narrative, but rather asks us to feel the emotion she felt, now expressed through form and subject matter. I find Bourgeois' Spider 1997 the most intriguing of all her Spider series. Bourgeois understood our fear and made it larger than life. She created a spider that became a structure and contained cells where objects, as Hale Foster writes, do not tell a story, but build one, a different one, but one that in a multiplicity of ways matters. In years 2009, I cut bands into a small girl's dress, sewing them back together. The threads in my struggle to complete it are left exposed. It is a metaphor for the effect my family relationships had on me in my formative years. In the book Louise Bourgeois, she speaks of her process as the torment that things are not right and the anxiety of not knowing what to do. One is immobile in the wake of the fear. It is the view from the bottom of the well. In terms of relationship to others, it is a total rejection and destruction. It is the return of the repressed. In this passage, she eloquently describes the process of creation, destruction, and the recreation of art in association with the psychology of relationships. In Not a Chair 2009, I am reminded that things can be overdone. It is essential to know when to stop. While working on Not a Chair, I was thinking, how could I make it more dangerous? I work in intense periods of focus where my plans and preparation take a backseat to my intuition. As I dissected it, this broken skeleton did not need to be repaired more or bound more. It was already in its most basic form, and it was dysfunctional. I did not design it this way. This revelation came about responding to the materials. Becoming a better observer, I looked at addiction, obsessive-compulsive disorders, and mental illness in my family environment. I examined familial relationships and psychology to discover hidden issues beneath the surface and make them visible. I am now mindful of repressed energy and the ensuing results of fear, anxiety, and compulsion. In essence, it has been my obsession to gather all the evidence I can, stories, photographs, objects, in an attempt to bring them all together and make them into something whole, to create something that might make a broken life understandable. I clarified my voice, creating new work, opening the doors for the viewers to make their own interpretations, while I reveal my experiences. Now I see the undertoad.